Bonjour. Je suis Robert Alès. Je voudrais présenter vous quelques projets. Et maintenant en anglais. Alors, I've been working in crypto art and NFTs for about 5 years now. And I just want to show you, in the 50 minutes we have, just a couple of projects that I've been working on and kind of what they mean for crypto and NFTs and maybe contemporary art in general. And there's a kind of big variety of things here, so you'll get a kind of insight into lots of different ways. The first project, Portraits of Mind, was really kind of one of the first major projects I made in the space. And it's an interesting way to kind of consider how physical work and digital work can intertwine. And that maybe NFTs are not necessarily, they don't necessarily have to kind of exist in a vacuum. They can relate to physical work too. So I just want, by way of just kind of setting a scene, this is it was part of an exhibition and project that I did at Sotheby's, sort of midway through last year. And I just want to kind of show you, I hope this will play. So this is a little trailer that we did that will give you an insight into a little bit of the project and the space and kind of what happened. It won't make sense, but I'll explain it to you in a second. So I kind of want to ask the question, like, how come NFTs and crypto art ended up in the middle of the North Sea on a former oil rig? You can see a work here that I made as it pans out. This is deep into the North Sea off the coast of the UK on a former World War II gun station that is now the longest micronation in the world. And really this is a kind of culmination of a project that started 3 or 4 years before that. And it was a series of, I'll see if I can show you. It was a series of paintings and NFTs that I made that related to the history of crypto and specifically the source code behind Bitcoin. And the idea behind these paintings and the NFTs that came with them is that it was a work in 2 parts, both physical and digital. And you'll see here each work has 322,000 digits behind the original source code of Bitcoin that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote in 2008. And really the idea behind this work is kind of how do you make a portrait of an individual who is essentially anonymous. And the idea was that really this source code, the very first set of text really to do with crypto is, I think, the closest proxy that we can get towards their identity. In many ways, they are the source code. They're not the individual behind the source code. And so these paintings, there are 40 of them, and they each hold an equal amount of this source code, which runs to 12.8 million digits, and that I hand-painted over 2 years in my studio. And they're now decentralized, I think, to 18 cities on every kind of livable continent in the world. And the idea as a collector is you only really get one portion or one segment of the code base, so that it is decentralized. You don't own the full artwork, although there are a number of collectors who are trying to buy up parts of it. And each of the NFTs is kind of like a digital representation of the painting. And I think what's kind of important to think about, especially with NFTs and crypto in general, is that while it's a very oh my god, there's people up here. Well, I've been staring at you guys. While it's very we think of the digital world and the NFT space as obviously very kind of immaterial and intangible, and it exists online. Specifically, obviously, with proof of work algorithms such as Bitcoin, it's very physically rooted, and in many ways, actually, the networks that exist online again are physically rooted as people that engage in proof of stake networks as well, like Ethereum. And so there's this kind of interesting tension between the digital space and the physical space. And when you think of nodes and networks, you think of specific locations that hold Bitcoin mines or people that provide staking for their computers. And it is physically rooted. And so I took the project to Sealand because Sealand is one of the oldest micronations in the world. It has existed outside of the state for nigh on 30 to 40 years. And crucially, in the 90s, it became a data haven, which is kind of like a tax haven but for data. And it was taken over by some cypherpunks from the west coast of America, kind of super libertarian cypherpunks. And the idea there is that they would, in these towers, they built data centers that basically the rules were no pornography, nothing to do with Nazis, and nothing to do with children. And that was basically, and anything else goes. And it was a really interesting moment. Obviously, in the 90s, you kind of have like the birth of PGP with Phil Zimmerman in 91. And you have this kind of first encroachment in terms of the relationship between the state and the individual on a privacy point of view. And this was a kind of an interesting moment for the history of privacy online. The project was a failure, and it kind of closed down 3 or 4 years later, but it was a lightning rod in the cypherpunk movement. And many of the people that built this project, they actually went on to be part of the same mailing lists that Satoshi would then go and post the Bitcoin white paper in. And so it was kind of interesting for me to bring these paintings that all relate to certain locations. So if I just show you here the map here, each painting within the code base has a set of locations. And so each painting is kind of nodally rooted. And the idea was to take the painting that it relates to back to its location. I wonder if there's... So you can see here, so the work was exhibited here with one side was the NFT and the other side was the painting. So you can see the painting there in situ. So moving to a completely different project, which was really kind of testing the forefront of pure play NFTs and what they can do, was a project I made earlier, I guess it was this year actually, called To the Young Artists of Cyberspace. And it was a manifesto told through an avatar. And it basically used a very complex set of APIs and AIs to create what was effectively a living, breathing manifesto. And usually, obviously, you know, it kind of relates back to Portraits of a Mind, which is all to do with original texts. And this was a kind of manifesto for the NFT space, but the idea here was less about one artist writing or one individual writing a manifesto in the same way that Marinetti wrote the Futurist Manifesto. How much time do I have? I'll keep going. It was more about how perhaps a collective could write a manifesto and be positioned through an avatar. And so this is what we call an INFT or an intelligent NFT. It was hooked up to GPT-3, complex lip syncing algorithms, and machine learning. And the idea is that I wrote a seed text, which was these bits of text here you can read, I think, a little pixelated. And basically what happened is we put it in the metaverse in Decentraland, and people could come past and they could ask questions to effectively this kind of avatar manifesto. And with each question, the avatar would respond back and kind of you'd have a conversation. And the idea would be is through machine learning, the manifesto would move further and further away from the original text. And over time would change and the responses would change. And so that it would be a reflection of the community around that had asked the questions and had the conversations. And so now this work was bought by a collector and it was sold at auction at Christie's. And it now lives in Decentraland, where you can go and you can pay, you know, a micro payment in Ethereum to have 20 questions or 20, a conversation with the manifesto. And it was a very interesting project, not just from a kind of conceptual point of view, but also from a kind of an idea of how NFTs can work from a financial point of view, because this collector bought a work which was very experiential and in some small way is providing them a return on their investment. So it's not just like a work that can, any other normal work that can kind of sits in a wallet and maybe accrues value. This can actually provide an new experience to multiple people, sometimes 10 or 15 or 20 people at the same time. And over the last 6 to 8 months, there's been 130,000 conversations with this work in Decentraland, and obviously when it was on show at Christie's. And you go and have a conversation with it, and the first conversations that I had firstly were very basic, because the machine learning was kind of gearing up. But also very, very close to the original text that I wrote, so that the answers would be cold off that. And that's now moving and moving and moving and moving away until it's something that's very, very different. And so it's a work that will grow and change over time and really becomes a reflection of the public, and much less a reflection of me. And then, so you can see here, it kind of moves around. And then some new work that I'm working on, which is actually I think on show here, is a work called Elegiacs. And if you look up Elegiacs, actually I only realized quite recently, it's the patron saint of coin collectors. But that's not really why I was interested in it. It's actually, if you go and look at the Bitcoin blockchain and also the Ethereum blockchain, it's the very first word that was posted by somebody other than the kind of author of the creator of those blockchains. And a miner who mined on both Ethereum and on Bitcoin would sign the transaction blocks that they'd mined with Elegiacs or Elegiacs Benedictus, which is a kind of Catholic prayer. And so either they are someone who's interested in the history of coin collecting, or they're someone who's interested in or perhaps is Catholic. And I think it's quite interesting to think that, like, you know, we think of crypto as in many ways a kind of new religion, and it's quite gospel-like in its form. But in actual fact, it's kind of funny to think that, like, religion and Catholicism is right at the core and the very base, and it's inserted into these blockchains forever. And so Elegiacs is a series of works that I've started to make. It's a slightly not as high res as you'd like it, but you can see here very abstractly the words Elegiacs fragmented and recomposed into lines and chains. And really this series of work is built on WebGL, and then used layered and layered by hand into kind of much more complex compositions, and is part of a research that I've been conducting for some larger generative works of art. So yeah, I think that's really all I have.